and we're going to talk about some of the activities that go on along the river. And there's some big artistic and dramatic events to be coming up in March. I'm with Camille Garro of Newburyport. She is a producer, and she works with the Actors Studio of Newburyport. She is working on a program of Herstory, which begins a week from Friday. And if you know or you think the name of history is his story, the name of Herstory is going to be talking a lot about the achievements of women. And welcome, Camille.
Oh, welcome. Thank you, Doug, for having me here.
Maybe you can talk a little about Herstory Month, how you came upon it, and then we'll talk about some of the really intriguing events that you have set up.
Oh, I'll be excited to do that. I started this Women's Herstory Month last year to be a fundraiser for the Actors Studio, and which is a black box theater at the Tannery. And I'm on the board of that theater, and I was excited to be celebrating and acknowledging all the cultural events that we have in this city. And I was trying to think of a good way to cross-pollinate all the memberships of the different organizations here, the Firehouse, the Custom House, screening room, every place that we have, how we can all let each other know that we exist. So I purposely set this up to have some of the performances be at their venues, and it worked out very well last year. So we geared up the minute that ended last year in March. And April 1st, we met, my committee, and we started planning the lineup for this year. We're very excited, and it's interesting that you emphasize the word Herstory, because that's actually from what gave me the idea for this name was that I was told that history is a maritime term for the men that told his stories. And I thought, oh, well, this will be a good way to have her story told through the month of Women's History Month.
As I understand it, it's a national and even international event that's going on, that a lot of women's achievements and women artistic events will be brought out, and Newburyport and the area is becoming part of that. Do I understand that?
That's absolutely correct. And that's what I set out to do. The Actors Studio has been around for about 27 years, and we have performances and workshops and classes all year long. And we have always acknowledged Women's History Month. I wanted to take it a step further and make it for the full month. So we have lined up the complete month. Every weekend there'll be 15 different performances being done.
Well, that's terrific, and one of the things that intrigues me, I'm interested in the river, of course, in history, and on Friday, March 1st, you have something at the Custom House Museum down on Water Street, and it's titled Captains, Wives, and Daughters, a short play about Newburyport in 1877. Can you talk a little about that? What will people be seeing at that time?
Yes. Well, you'll be seeing a dramatization written by Adair Rowland, who's from Amesbury, and she's part of the Actors Studio as well. And we did a dramatization last year at the Custom House. They did the kickoff last year. They're doing it again this year for their first Friday celebration. And last year we did it with a dramatization of Elizabeth Bray. We found her journals at the museum, and they let us have sections of it to come up with a play about Elizabeth Bray, who was allowed by her husband, who was a sea captain, to go on the ocean and travel abroad for years. For a few years, she brought her little 5-year-old daughter. So her little 5-year-old daughter went along. So we did that dramatization last year. This year, and that was in 1850s. This year, the little daughter Fanny comes back. It's 1877. Comes back and joins the Graves family for Thanksgiving.
Well, that sounds interesting. I remember the Bray story, and I recall remembering when the wife joined her captain husband on board, took Fanny, who was about 5. They were going for about 5 years, but what struck me is two of her sons were left on the dock. They were 8 and 10, and I should quickly point out, they have family there, and they had everything lined up, just like the babysitter who feeds the cat, the whole deal. But I've always wondered, the kids must have been very happy to see the ship come back 5 years later.
Well, what happened was it was supposed to be a 10-month journey, and they took Elizabeth because she was, Fanny, because she was only 5 years old, so she didn't have to go to school. The boys did. And so they went, but an opportunity came up for trading. It was also a trade ship. And they were supposed to go to just Liverpool, but an opportunity came up, so they hopped down to India. And so the dramatization is about that. So that ended up 2 years. They came back, and then the second go-around, she did take the son and left Fanny behind. And we have it that Fanny somewhat resented that and wasn't pleased about that because she loved being on that ship.
Well, one of the things I've been intrigued by, I recently wrote a book called Nautical Newburyport, and it talks about the incredible travels that captains had and crews had from Newburyport. They went all over the world, Honolulu, Bombay, just Russia. They had many trips, and I recalling there are many young people, many young boys who would go on as cabin boys, and it was said that some boys had been to Honolulu or India but had never been to Boston.
Right.
So, there were you could go for a long time on these given trips at sea. Maybe you could talk a little about, there's so much going on. That is Friday, March 1st, starting at 6 at the Custom House. On Saturday, March 2nd, you have a program. Can you talk about that?
That's going to be done by Theater in the Open, Tito. And this is another example of how we decided to join up with other organizations, and they agreed to participate with us. They eagerly agreed, and they are going to do a presentation performance on classic women. So it will be Shakespearean, and it will be in their typical. A lot of times they do farcical performances. They're usually children-oriented, outdoors, but they do the firehouse performances. So this one will be actually at the firehouse. The firehouse was, again, generous to donate their venue, so that will be on that Saturday evening. And they will have an encore presentation of classic women at the Actors Studio on the 9th. So we'll see it transformed from a larger stage to the tiny stage.
Coming up as well as Top Knots, which talks about mothers and their daughters, not necessarily in history, but talk about that. That's Friday, March 8th, and that sounds like an interesting presentation.
Yes, that's going to be hosted at Top Knots, which is on Titcomb Street, and it's a company that set up to have rentable spaces for women to have offices outside their home. So that's the venue, is their business. And they decided to host this beautiful presentation that we found of photographer Maureen Cotton that did this lovely photography of mothers and daughters in business. So the photos are just lovely. They're nice composition of these mothers and daughters that went into business together. So we decided this is fitting the theme of us celebrating women through the arts. That's the key of what I'm doing with Women's Her Story Month, is celebrating women and all they do through the arts. So this fit that bill where we're putting up the pictures of them. These companies, these little companies with mothers and daughters will be there. And Maureen Cotton will be there, and we'll be hosting a lovely reception with appetizers and wine, and it's just going to be a nice event after work for people, or just at 6 o'clock. It will be just a wonderful time to chat and talk about.
Well, one of my favorite stories about young women girls in Newburyport, actually. As we know, there weren't too many opportunities for girls and women to go out to sea. But in the 1840s and 1850s, Newburyport became the first city in Massachusetts to actually permit girls to go to public high school. Now, there were many schools at that time, but they were dance schools or art schools, and generally paid by the individuals. And Newburyport reportedly is the first one where the town fathers, and I think they were all fathers at that time, said, we're going to have the girls go to school, and this is going to be with tax money. So for about 20 years, 1844 to about 1866, there was a female high school on Washington Street. And there's some wonderful photos of that. I always think back, because that was in part because Newburyport had a lot of orphans. Many people were lost at sea. And the Maritime Society in Newburyport had a fund for orphans, but it only went to the families of captains or mates. It did not go to regular working people. So I think in part because of the number of orphans, in part maybe Newburyport was a progressive place. It became one of the first areas in the country to send girls to a high school, pay for them with tax dollars. So that's an exciting element. I notice you have many things going on, and one of them is going to be, we're on radio now, of course we're on television as well, but there's going to be a presentation on vintage radio.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
That's going to be a lot of fun, and actually I'm going to be one of the performers in that, so I know it well, and we've been practicing this now for about a month, but it will be the format on stage of the vintage radio. So people will be able to view it, but we got authentic old vintage radio shows with their commercials that they would interrupt the program and complete with that with their music. So it's all authentic, and we will be playing them as if we're talking into mics and doing the complete radio hour. We'll have 3 little performances. There's going to be about 7 of us doing the different roles, and it's very funny because you have to. We're being trained right now to talk into a pretend microphone and somewhat act, but pretend that you're on the radio. So it's a new element that none of us have dealt with.
Back to the future with this one. And then you have coming up a little later, Zelda Fitzgerald is featured. Now, she was the wife of Scott Fitzgerald. She was a great writer herself. And I'm reading a biography of Max Perkins now, who happened to be Fitzgerald and Hemingway's editor. And it's sometimes said that Zelda was the better half, that she was a great writer. Some of her frustrations came because Scott got all the credit, and her mental health, I think, diminished towards the end. But it sounds like this could be a juicy part. Can you talk a little about Rita Parisi, who's doing
Yes.
it, and how this is going to play out?
Yes.
And I think it's being done twice.
Yes, we have it on March 16th, Saturday at 8 o'clock at the Actors Studio, again on Sunday the 17th at 3 o'clock at the Actors Studio. And Rita Parisi is the sole proprietor of her business. She is the director, the writer. She does all of this, and the performer all by herself. And I actually discovered her in my dance class, which is a ballet dance right here at the Senior Center. And she came on board new last year, and she told me that it was so that she could learn how to do ballet, because she was doing this one-woman show about Zelda Fitzgerald, who became a professional self-taught ballerina. And so she wanted to learn how to do ballet so that it would enhance her performance of Zelda herself. So she is taking that to our stage, and it is going to be revealing a lot of things that people do not know of what she's all about, what Zelda is all about.
Well, she was a dynamic character, of course, that whole group was, and they're coming up on 100 years. They were the lost generation of the 20s is well known. I see on Friday, March 22nd, you have Michael Garro coming in. Can you talk about what he'll be discussing?
He's a favorite at the Actors Studio, and he is an intuitive performer or guest, whatever way he wants to be called, but he is fascinating because he knows nothing about any of the audience when they come in, and he will be spot on with just choosing someone all from the intuition and talking about things, not talking about the future or any of that, but just about their lives and awareness. And he's just an interesting person to be watching as part of this process. And then when you're involved with it as one of his selections, it's very interesting. So that's always a treat when he comes.
It sounds exciting. I don't know that I'd like to be the one picked out, but there are people like that. Well, I'm Dyke Hendricks, and I'm with Camille Garro. We're talking Life Along the Merrimack, which is a podcast and a TV presentation where we talk about sometimes the river itself and its history, but sometimes what actually happens here in the community. And March is History Month, and that's what we are talking about right now. On March 23rd, you have a cappella chorus coming up, and that's going to be at the Hope Community Church. Perhaps you can talk about that.
Yes, I discovered this female group at another church here in Newburyport that they're from Cape Ann, and they never came to Newburyport before. And I was so impressed. They told, through their singing, all these women's stories, just one was a Freddie Mercury song, so the span is and the scope is large.
That doesn't tie your mother down, is it? Well, excuse me, it just popped into my mind.
And I was just really impressed by how compelling all their songs were, their voices, but their message. They were very heartfelt, and I said, I've got to see if they'll be part of this month. And they were very eager because they are trying to broaden their field of where they perform, because they have been, I think, for 17 years performing out of Rockport and Gloucester, that area particularly. And so they're very excited. We decided we wanted to have it at a bigger venue so that more people could see them. So that's why I asked Hope Church if we could use their location. And so that's why we are doing it there. And plus their sound system the sound is great. It's a cappella, so there won't be any.
Well, I see on March 24th you have something coming up that focuses on Eleanor Roosevelt. And I just wanted to mention, Newburyport has had remarkable women. Eleanor Roosevelt, of course, is in a league of her own. But two of the women in Newburyport that were really remarkable that I would just comment upon one was Anna Jakes. Anna Jakes Hospital is named after her, and she was really the driving force of having our whole medical system here. She was an unmarried woman in Newbury. She had money toward the end of her life, and she said, asked for advice on how can I help the community, and the answer was maybe we can build up the community's medical center. And it all started with Anna Jakes, a local woman. And, of course, we've seen what a large presentation that's become. Another woman that I look up to in history is Emma Lander Andrews, who is an educator. She felt that all people, young people, should get to read. And she started a book collection in the South End so young people could get books easily and so they could get a good chance for education. Now we have what's known as the Andrews Library on Marlborough Street. So those are two that jump into my mind. And maybe now you can talk a little about Eleanor Roosevelt. I think we all have some recollection of her. And how is this presentation going to play out?
Well, again, this is another single woman dramatization done by Cheryl Fay, and she does several people the same way Rita Parisi does different shows. Cheryl Fay does too, and we discovered her at another library in another city and doing this Eleanor Roosevelt presentation, and the place was mobbed and waiting lists to come in. And so we said, this is a great opportunity. We asked her if she'd like to do it at the Actors Studio. She was very excited about that opportunity. So we're thrilled to have her on board, and it's a fabulous presentation.
Well, Eleanor Roosevelt was remarkable in so many ways, but I'm a career journalist, and I remember for the entire period that her husband Franklin was in office, she had a daily newspaper column. And for 6 days a week, she wrote a newspaper column, which was syndicated, got her message out to women in many cases. Some of it was advice, some of it was things like darning socks or making food, because she was smart in a lot of areas. But others were just, how trying to give encouragement to women to cope, because, during Roosevelt's early stage, 1933 to say 1940, the Great Depression was on, and so this was the era of radio. She was on the radio frequently, but she also wrote a newspaper column. So, in history, she was really one of the most dynamic women, and we talk about first ladies now, but historians say she really set the mold for remarkably an active and useful partner. I notice on Friday, March 29th, you have the Powell River Poets and Friends. I mean, that's a great group. Those who go to the Newburyport Literary Festival, which is in late April, I remark upon that because I'm in that, and my wife runs it. But beyond that, maybe you can talk a little about the Powell River Poets and what's going to be happening then.
Oh, yes. Well, that's headed up by Rena Espaillat, and she agreed. She did this last year at the Actors Studio. Again, the place sold out, and they were excited to be performing there. They asked, can we do this again next year? So they're on board again, and we're thrilled to have them. And they will be doing I think it's called a polypoia or some name like that, where they will all be sitting in a circle and telling their poetry, all parts of it, one by one. And it's not quite the Malapuia that they actually have at the Custom House with music. There will be no music with it, but it's lyrical. It's just, Rena is such a treat to have involved with anything that we do. So that will be, again, another exciting performance.
Well, Rena is really quite remarkable. She has had 15 to 20 books of poetry put into English and Spanish. She's from the Dominican Republic. She has been honored as the poet of the Dominican Republic in the past. There's a street named after her. Oh. So, she is really a titan among us, and she's very well known here, as you've pointed out, and it's a treat every time she presents because she's really a good entertainer, a brilliant poet, and the Powwow Poets is certainly a good draw for you. Towards the end of March, Saturday, March 30th, there's going to be Charles von Eman with Barb Kelzer. Can you talk a little about that?
Yes. Charlie is actually, we're all excited to have Charlie just part of our community. He's been here for several years now, but he's actually from California. He was a soap opera star, and now he directs us. So he is actually a director of the Senior Readers Theater at the Firehouse, which I do that. So I'm learning a lot of theater through him. And he teaches a lot of improv classes and scene study classes, many classes at the Actors Studio. Last year, we did the scene study and did that as a performance at the Actors Studio for this lineup. This year, we decided let's do the improv. Improv is such an integral part of what we could all benefit from, because it teaches you not only how to feel comfortable with speaking to people, but really to hone in on your listening skills and really interacting through every way of life, business, family, your partner. And so it really can sharpen all kinds of listening skills and speaking skills. And so it's a fun way to enlighten the audience of what improv can do, because it's very entertaining to watch. But then if people realize really what's happening with it, it's almost magical.
You mentioned he's a bit of a newcomer, and by Newburyport standards, I think you are too, Camille.
Right. Oh, yes.
How did you find your way to Newburyport, and do you have a history of acting and theater and that type of...
No history at all. Now, I started out, my real career is 30 years of my own business as interior design in the Wellesley area. I used to own Wellesley Design Center. So I raised my son in Dover, Mass. And when he graduated and went off to college, I decided to migrate north. And I stopped in Boston, lived there a little bit, and then wanted more of a community. So, and I loved the historical houses, loved by the Merrimack, everything about it drew me, but I loved that energy and the feeling of community here. I had no inkling of theater, and I immediately got involved with Charlie at the firehouse to do the acting. Was told check out the actor's studio, and it really I was bitten by the bug. It was just an amazing. The whole experience is incredible. I've do the occult reading classes. I started writing. I wrote a musical that was performed last year at the Firehouse Treason, and I do mostly writing now, which I never knew I could do or wanted to do, and the same with the acting. So it's just really opened up a complete new world. I did decide to retire, so because I wanted to pursue all of this.
Well, I've talked to a number of people who have moved to Newburyport in recent years, and they said the number of arts, the number of theater groups, the number of, just festivals and whatever was very appealing. So you must have been aware of that when you were making your decision.
I just actually remember my parents driving up here to see movies at the screening room, and that was a long time ago, but they were just really intrigued by the water, just this little community, and that just stayed with me, that it was, and then it was just obviously a very cultural city, and my background with art and interior design, it was just a perfect fit for me.
Well, one of the great decisions that the people made here in Newburyport was about a half dozen years ago. The screening room, which is right downtown, the movie theater, was about to go under because they couldn't really afford the new technology, and they needed an upgrade. They needed a new popcorn machine, too, but I do feel that was on the back burner. But they went on, a campaign to raise money, and they tried to raise about $60,000 on Kickstarter, but they were able to raise about $120,000. So I always look at that as, a real benefit of the community. People came together and donated, and so we have, we have wonderful movies here. Sometimes it is used as theater. So this, in my view, is a community fundraising event on Kickstarter that really worked out.
Right.
So I'm going to ask you one more thing. We're coming to the end of our half hour. Thank you again, Camille, for joining me.
Thank you.
There's one event Sunday, March 31st at the Actors Studio, Left on Pearl, it is called. Can you talk a little about that?
Sure. That's a movie that was actually at the film festival this past fall, and it was so popular that people were asking if I could show it as part of this, and I had no way of knowing how to get hold of it. They actually came to us. They discovered that we were doing this and said it was just one of those coincidental things, that synchronicity or whatever, but they asked if we could show it at some point, and we did have this slot open, and I think it's a perfect ending to our month, because this was an